this is Vivica Williams, and you're watching Head to Head. On June 11th, 2017, Ukrainian citizens were granted visa-free travel to the EU. Since then, Ukrainians have crossed the EU member states' borders more than 20 million times, according to the State Border Guard Service. That's over 2 million times more than before the visa-free regime was instituted. To talk more about the benefits of the regime and future prospects, we welcome to the studio today Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration of Ukraine. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So most people know about the benefits as tourists, but what are some of the other major benefits that people don't think about with this regime?
Well, first of all, I think it's extremely important that we are finally having the access to one of the major freedoms that the free world is enjoying for a long time, and that is the visa-free travel to the EU. And I think it's also a psychological shift that Ukrainian citizens are undergoing, and that we have to underline as well. And obviously the benefits there are the possibilities for business ties to be established, visiting different projects, different cultural events, possible educational events, short-term ones that our people can attend, for example, and this great people-to-people contacts that I'm sure are changing the attitude towards both Ukrainians, who we are, what we are, and how we are perceiving ourselves, and how we are showing ourselves to the world, and also how Ukrainians are getting maybe yet additional vaccination from the Russian world that was so felt here before 2014.
Well, it's exposure exactly to European values and seen when they travel as well. And do you have information on the reception from the European side and Europeans?
Well, first of all, I could tell you probably about the kind of official line that we are receiving from the European Union, from the European commissioners, and that is that they are underlying that Ukrainians have already proven to be responsible travelers, and they are not violating in their masses, they are not violating the visa-free travel regulations, and therefore that means that we have all the prospects to have further enjoy the possibilities of the visa-free for all the citizens of Ukraine, and I'm very happy about that, because there have been some, projections that maybe Ukrainians would not be behaving as
not
good.
Returning, well, seeing a lot of people using it as an exodus route. But
exactly,
but
that's not what's happening. And if people are going to work in the EU countries, they're usually doing it under the legal grounds when they have the receiving side there in the EU countries waiting for Ukrainians to work.
Oh, absolutely. This is a really great development. And what do we see with, say, for example, do you have numbers or specifics about closer relationships between bordering states? I know that Poland is a great recipient of travelers, but as well as legal migrants to work. So what have you seen in pickups in these areas?
Well, yes, we do see a lot of Central and Eastern European countries being very much interested in the Ukrainian workforce. And for us, it's another challenge, because we would like to preserve these citizens of ours here through creating additional opportunities, economic opportunities for them to realize their dreams and their potential here inside the country. And that's why we are, as the government, we are concentrating on creating additional economic opportunities inside of the country. At the same time, we know that there is an eagerness among quite a few of our neighboring countries who would like to even sign some agreements with Ukraine, memorandums of possibilities of employing Ukrainian workforce in this or that area, and create this legal grounds for Ukrainians to be employed in the EU countries.
But on the other side, we do see that Ukraine is a wonderful breeding ground for businesses, especially for startups, and the visa-free regime seems to allow more business connections. I know you can't speak much, it's not on your thing to speak much about incoming, but it would people coming from the EU, but it would seem that this would lead to better relationships and more cross-border travel on both sides.
Absolutely. It does lead to that. I don't have the exact numbers right now at hand, but we also see that there that a combined effect of also visa-free and the possibilities for people to establish this business contacts and in different spheres, and the possibilities that are opening up through the implementation of the association agreement and agreement on deep and comprehensive visa-free trade agreement between Ukraine and the EU are creating additional kind of boost to the economic ties between Ukraine and the EU countries, and that's why we see that by the end of last year we already had 41% of our external trade being the trade with the EU countries. So definitely it does mean that it's not only one-sided traveling is happening, but we also have the inflow of our partners from the Western countries.
Well, that's good to see. So we're seeing that these go hand in hand. You can't have a deep free trade agreement or association agreement without having the freedom of movement to be able to really implement these.
And that's kind of a basis for the next stages. And we will be, as we are implementing further the association agreement and DCFTA, we will see more and more possibilities for, let's say, visa-free for our goods and for services between Ukraine and the EU. But for that, we still have to work very deeply here to continue the transformation that we've started here in Ukraine.
And the other thing we see as well, so the reason Ukraine was able to receive this was based a lot on the implementation of reforms and the progress made in that. So after Ukraine received the visa-free regime, what have you seen or noted in the progress or speed or the depth of reforms in Ukraine? Has that changed?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that when we were working for visa-free, it was Visa Liberalization Action Plan that had 144 specific things that Ukraine had to accomplish in order to be considered for being granted or not visa-free. And that's where we were concentrating. But along the lines, we've been also concentrating on other reforms in other sectors. So right now, the other sectors, more of the economic development, more of the e-governance, more of the also the deregulation, more of transformation of the approach to the state-owned enterprises, going through towards privatization of the inefficient state-owned enterprises. This is exactly what we are focusing right now on in order to have better efficiency here in Ukraine. So we can discuss probably the reforms in absolutely every single sector of our economy, and they've been very serious and really transformative, and some areas are further ahead, some are definitely not yet there.
Right. And let's switch a bit to talk about security. So one of the requirements here, and I'm sure in the visa liberalization requirements, was improving border security. So what are some of the things we've seen? I mean, they're the obvious things we see, but what are some of the less obvious improvements or changes we see in border security?
Well, it's about integrated border control, and that's where you are not using only exclusively border guards in order to ensure that you are working with the security of your borders. So you are also ensuring how you are, what are the possibilities of you treating the refugees? How do you protect personal data? And that's a huge reform that is still continues, you know, personal data. And we see how we are based on earlier reforms, how we are building on that. So, and that's something that is not really immediately seen to the general public, but the state is really delivering on that, and we will continue this, and because we have other opportunities that are being set also in the association agreement, and we can build on this justice and home affairs and security issues inside the country, and that would be of benefit both for the Ukrainian citizens but also for our partners in the EU, so that we could maybe someday hope that Ukraine will be opening up another chapter of associating with Schengen.
And speaking on that note, what are you seeing as maybe the next steps? So we have the visa-free regime. What are you seeing in the next steps when it comes to this particular sphere?
Well, that's where I would focus on, that we could get a closer cooperation with the EU, different agencies that are working in this area. We do already have the Europol working with Ukraine, Eurojust working with Ukraine, but we also can open up the opportunities of working with the other agencies in the EU on security and border management and a cooperation with the legal law enforcement agencies, for example. That's one thing that could lead to these opportunities of the getting closer to requirements of the Schengen acquis. But we're also focusing on, so to say, visa-free for our goods and services that will be allowing us to get much more intertwined with the European Union countries and thus being more competitive as well with the EU.
Okay. Well, thank you. And that's what we hope to see, is building upon this and seeing what the next steps are.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And that was Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration of Ukraine. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more.